So to prove my thesis statement, basically, how do I organize everything in the essay? So some strategies for an introduction. This comes from a writer's reference. You might think about doing one of the following. Don't try to do all of these things. At the beginning of your introduction, get your reader invested in what you're saying. Get them interested. So these are some different ways that you might get their interest. Now, this depends. You have a choice here. If you think that your reader is already interested in what you have to say, you can skip this kind of hook that begins the essay. You can just get right into the analysis. It's up to you. You have to think about this. Your reader, obviously, is me, but also other academics who are familiar with the story. So you have to think about this kind of role play. Do you think they're interested? If so, I can get right to it. And if not, then I probably need to kind of compel them. So one of these types of things could work. In a longer paper, like a research paper, you might think about mixing them. So you might start with a startling statistic and then give an anecdote, a story that humanizes the topic. But in a short paper like this and your other two first papers of the semester, I would recommend just sticking to one type of compelling opening if you choose to use one. After I've done that, after I've kind of hooked the reader, if I choose to do so, I just need to give some background information. If I choose to skip the hook, I can go right into the background information. You might think about a very brief summary. Again, your readers read it, so you want to keep it brief. And you probably want to tailor your summary to focusing on the specific topic that you are going to be talking about within the essay. So maybe you're focusing on, you give a 2 or 3 sentence summary of brownies focused on how the cycle of hatred is a present theme in the story. You might think about the question that you're answering and why it's complicated. So how successful is her argument? What's she arguing? Well, this isn't easy to answer because X and Y and Z. And then present your answer. So this is what I think she's arguing, and this is how successful I think she is in her argument. Now, you'll notice I'm using the I as I talk about this and give examples. In your paper, you want to avoid the I, and that stuff can easily be edited out. If you prefer to start your rough draft using the I, you can always go back and take out the I thinks and replace it with, well, usually just take it right out and it still reads fine. So once I've provided an introduction that gives, that optionally gives some kind of hook and then definitely gives some kind of background information on the story and then presents my thesis, I need to prove my thesis in the body of my paper. So body paragraphs are the way to do that. Some people like to have a section of body paragraphs that each develops a point, or some people like to have body paragraphs that each one will state a new point. But they should always stick to developing your thesis. And they'll need to have some kind of topic sentence that previews the paragraph or section of paragraph's point and how it relates to the thesis. For example, one way that Packer shows the cycle of hatred being used in brownies is through X and Y. Stick to the point. Don't add anything that's unnecessary. Use transitions when necessary. A good transition is, for example, anytime you're moving from a broad point in your topic sentence to a specific example from the story. And body paragraphs generally should vary in length, so it doesn't feel too formulaic and like you just kind of plugged in information in some kind of essay formula. So here's an example of a topic sentence. In addition to successfully developing her intention through setting, which would be what I discussed in a previous body paragraph, Packer uses symbolism to show how her story is representative of the larger issue of ... So we can assume from this topic sentence that, again, previously, in my previous paragraph or section of paragraphs, the discussion was about how she used setting. And then this new paragraph is going to be about symbolism. Then be sure to back up your points with evidence from the text. So you might summarize something that happened in the story. You might quote directly from it, which can often be the strongest type of evidence, or you can paraphrase something. In a short story, I think quotes are probably going to be the most effective way to go. Generally, 1 to 3 quotes per paragraph is fine. I don't recommend going over 3 in a paragraph because it gets muddy, and we're jumping from your ideas to the authors, to yours, to the authors, to yours, to the authors. If you have a whole bunch of supporting evidence to support a point, you might think about developing that point in 2 or 3 body paragraphs. Again, a new body paragraph doesn't necessarily have to make a brand new point. It can continue the discussion of a previous body paragraph. And when you're moving into quotes in a body paragraph, you might think about for example or for instance to naturally lead us from the general to the specific, from the broad point you're making in the topic sentence to your specific evidence. But yes, this paper does need quotes in it. After you present a quote in a body paragraph, be sure to explain it. Don't just leave the quote at the end of a body paragraph and assume your reader is going to understand the quote the same as you do. Give some explanation. How does it support the point that you were making previously in the paragraph? How does it relate to your thesis? So I like to think about body paragraphs kind of like a circle. It presents a point in the topic sentence, then presents some supporting information in the middle, and then explains and comes back around to the point. You can also think about a body paragraph kind of like a sandwich, where the beginning of the paragraph and the ending of the paragraph make parallel points, and then everything else is the filling in the sandwich. The conclusion of the paper, keep it short. Remind the reader of your thesis. Don't just repeat it word for word, though. Say it in some fresh way. Think about leaving the reader with something to consider. We'll look at some strategies for that here in a second. If you did use some kind of compelling introduction, you might think about coming back to the content of that hook to give a sense of closure. If you didn't use some kind of hook at the beginning, then I wouldn't do that because you don't really have anything to come back to. But something to consider if you do use some kind of hook. Keep in mind, a conclusion should not have new information or new examples from the story. They might be examples from the world around you or something, but generally you're not presenting anything new in a conclusion, generally. So you might think about summarizing your main points that you made. I would do this very briefly, maybe a sentence or two. Don't go into great detail. It's a short paper. They just read it. They're probably likely to remember your main points, so you can just touch on them briefly. You might think about proposing a course of action if you think that's relevant, or a recommendation. Discuss the topic's wider significance. This is a good one, the so what. Why is this even important? Or even pose a question for future study. Something that some kind of question the story has generated that needs to be looked into by us as humans. A couple things to keep in mind. Anytime you present a quote, contextualize it. I like to think about the W questions. What's happening at the time of the quote? When is this in the story? Where is it happening? Why is it happening? Who's saying it? You don't have to put all of those things in it, but add those that will help the reader understand the quote better. Definitely want to say who is saying the quote, though. That's really important. Otherwise, we don't understand it correctly. As far as tone, don't try to sound like Socrates. Try to sound like a modern-day human. But also use standardized language. Keep in mind that your audience is a broad academic audience that could have learned English anywhere in the world. So you don't want to use a bunch of slang things that only a Californian would understand, for example. So very plain, standardized language that someone who learned English in Norway would understand just the same as someone who learned English in Texas. And consider forming a rough outline to help with your organization. Definitely have a thesis in mind before you go to write your draft, and have a couple points in mind, ways that the author develops her argument to keep your essay focused and from going all over the place. So definitely have a thesis and at least 2 or 3 points in mind that you want to develop before you really get to writing. After you've written your draft, think about checking your conclusion to see if your thesis has emerged more clearly. It often does. It's very natural for us to refine our thinking about what we're writing about, because writing is a way of thinking. So by the time you get to your conclusion, the thing that you've been trying to say throughout the body of your paper comes out much more clearly, just as a result of really examining your thinking through the act of writing. So check your conclusion, see if your thesis comes out better, and go back and tweak your thesis if you need to. Also, there's a Reading and Writing Center, there's Smart Shops, there's NetTutor. All of those things can be found, their schedules, in the syllabus link in Canvas. So you can check that out if you need some additional help. Also, you can email me with specific questions, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. Okay, so I'll stop there, and hopefully you found this to be somewhat helpful in preparing for Essay 1. You'll have all of next week to write it, so you'll have plenty of time to work on it. One thing that I didn't discuss, but I just kind of want to point out, is you can show how the author uses literary devices to help. You don't have to do it this way. You can go completely thematic in terms of how you're showing she organizes her or develops her argument. But if you're into more of the nuts and bolts of fiction, you might think about showing how she uses some of those literary devices. That would be fine as well.